In this lesson, we're going to look at how we can refine the shape of a Nurbs curve using the point weight attribute, and also by adding or removing control vertices to or from the curve. In an earlier lesson, we had a very quick dip into attributes when we used the point scale attribute to control the width of an open polygon at render time. And we're going to have another quick dip into attributes here, but this time we're looking at the point weight attribute. So I'm going to start by drawing a simple curve in this top view. And I'll hit enter to finish drawing the curve, and I'll change the primitive type to Nurbs, and I'll dive inside this geometry container. Nurbs curves allow us to add a weight value to the control points to specify the amount of pull that each control vertex has on the shape of the curve. So after this curve node, I'll add an attribute create node. And in here, I'll change the attribute name to PW, and that's a capital P, small w, for point weight. I want to add this point weight attribute to the points, so I'll leave this class set to point, and the data type of float is also what we need for a point weight attribute. You'll see that now I've added this attribute, my curve has actually disappeared. All that we're visualizing in the viewport here are the CVs and the primitive hulls, and that's because the default value for point weight should be 1, but the value that's being generated by the attribute create node is 0. So I'm going to change this first default field to 1 and also this value field to 1, and now we see the curve again. With a point weight value of 1 on each of these points, we're not affecting the shape of the curve in any way. If I toggle the bypass flag on and off for this attribute create node, we can see that it's not having any effect on the shape of the curve. Now if I simply increase the point weight value, we don't see any change, and that's because we're applying an equal point weight value to every point on the curve. What we're interested in is the difference in point weight of one or more control points compared to the other control points on the curve. So to affect only a single point, I can come up to the parameters of this attribute create node and click to enter the geometry selection mode, and now I can select a specific control point in the viewport. Now we see we're only affecting the weight of that specific point, and now I can continue to adjust this parameter value to adjust the point weight on that point. As I increase the point weight value above 1, the point has a stronger pull on the curve, and we see that we start to get a sharper corner as the curve's drawn towards that point. If I decrease the value below 1, we see that we get the opposite effect, where the pull of this control vertex becomes weaker and weaker as we move the value towards 0, and so it has less and less influence on the shape of the curve. If we want to visualize the point weights directly in the viewport, then we can easily do that by bringing up the node info on any node where that attribute exists. So in this case on the attribute create node, and then we can just click on that attribute name. So I'll click on PW, and in this case we don't see anything straight away. But if I come over to the display options toolbar, towards the bottom here we have a button to enable viewport visualization. If I right click on this, we can see that a scene visualizer for the PW attribute has been added. But I'm going to need to change a couple of settings for us to be able to see those values directly in the viewport. If I click on the pencil icon, that brings up the settings for this visualizer, and the default options are set to visualize this attribute as a color, which isn't what I want. I just want to see the numerical values of each point displayed by the side of each point. So I'll change the type from color to marker, and the marker style is text, which is what I want. And I'll also give it a bit of help and tell Houdini that we want to visualize a point attribute. And I'll also just change the font size to large, and now we can see those point weights being visualized by the side of each point on the curve. If I adjust the point weight value in the parameter editor again, we can see that value being displayed by the side of that point in the viewport. And we can see that the other points on this curve all have that default point weight value of 1. Now I know that just like in the earlier lesson, I've flown through a load of stuff to do with attributes without really explaining much at all about what does what. But in the next course, we are going to be going into detail about all these aspects of creating, working with, and visualizing attributes. All I want to demonstrate at this point is that the control points on a Nurbs curve can have a unique weight value assigned to them. And in Houdini, we do that using this point weight attribute. When we create this point weight attribute, we have to use this name and specific syntax for it. It has to be written as capital P, small w, without any space between. This is what Houdini recognizes and understands as point weight. For example, if I change this W to a capital W, Houdini no longer recognizes this value as a point weight value, and we can see it no longer has any effect on the shape of the curve. As soon as I change it back to the small case W, Houdini knows what we're talking about and applies the value as a point weight to the control vertex. If we wanted to assign a unique point weight to another point on this curve, then we could do that in a few different ways, but the quickest would probably be to copy this attribute create node and wire it in after this first attribute create node. Now I can just enter the geometry selection mode and select a new point on the curve and hit enter to confirm that selection. Now I can just use the value ladder over the value parameter field to adjust the point weight of this point. Using point weights to control the shape of Nurbs curves is probably something which works best in procedural workflows. If we're drawing curves as part of some direct modeling work or for an animation path, then a similar result to this can often be achieved by simply adding more control points to the curve. So for example, if I were to come back up to this curve node, and I'll actually just copy it and set the display flag to it. Now with the handle tool active, I can hold down shift and click on a point on the curve to add an extra control point. Now I can adjust the position of these two control points to be close together, and that creates a similar hardening of that corner in the curve around those 2 points. If I want it to be a harder corner still, I can hold down shift and click to add another point, and position that again close to these other 2 points. Now with these 3 control points, I have quite precise and interactive control over the shape of this corner. I could do the same thing by this second point over here and hold down shift and click on the curve to add another point, and then I can adjust the point positions to achieve a harder corner. If we want to remove points, then with the handle tool still active, we can just select that point that we want to delete and then hit the delete key to remove it. So let's look at how we can use point weights to control the amount of weight or pull that specific points have, and how we can add and delete points to refine the shape of the curve whilst we're working in the curve node.